So, on today's podcast, we're talking about the top 3 lessons we can learn as leaders and teams from the fall of the once tech giant BlackBerry and their plummet to irrelevance. What do we as leaders and cultures need to remember as we aim to navigate change? Welcome back to The Thermostat with Jason Barger. If you're currently on a commute, a walk, or just a micro break in your day, glad you're making time to step back, to think, and to reflect on the next steps on your journey. I've never been more convinced the best leaders and team cultures in the world are the ones that make time to step back, breathe in good oxygen, and calibrate their thermostat. I hope today's conversation leaves you feeling grounded and inspired. Now let's dive into today's topic to engage our minds and hearts in order to authentically lead and create compelling cultures wherever we are in the world. Hey everyone, it's Jason, and welcome back to the Thermostat Podcast. Wherever you are and however you're coming to the podcast today, welcome back. So glad that you are here. It is amazing. We're in season 7, nearly 200 episodes. So if you are new to the podcast, welcome. So glad you're here. And I hope you'll go back and check out some of the old topics, some of the old micro pods or interviews I've done. Hopefully some great topics that will add value and contribute to where you are in your life and your work. And if you are one of the OGs that have been with us from the very beginning, so glad you're back. Glad this continues to add value. We continue to hear great things about the podcast, so glad that you are back. My promise to you, as always, is that this is a place for you to step back, a time in your week or your month to kind of get your mind right, to hopefully have some ideas and some topics that will breathe some good oxygen into you and help you calibrate your own thermostat for the type of leader, the type of person that you're hoping to be, and also for the culture that you're trying to create for the people around you. So before we dive into today, if you'll do me a quick favor, if you will rate the podcast 5 stars on whatever platform you're using. Of course, that is a way that the algorithms help recognize and find podcasts and also help amplify them. So rating the podcast is helpful. A positive review in your own authentic words. Again, that always helps and helps people. Again, the algorithms work. And then lastly, sharing it with the people in your team, your colleagues, your life, on social media, whatever is authentic for you, but sharing things that resonate with you. Those are the ways in which this podcast spreads. And for that, I'm very grateful for anybody that takes the time to do that. So thank you. If you haven't been asleep over the last few years, if you've been, unless you've been sleeping or somehow missed the last few years, then you're fully aware of the rapid rate of change that we've all been experiencing. So much has been changing around us in the world and certainly across industries and in business, but in the world, that the one thing that we all have been able to identify is that things are changing. Years ago, it would have been unheard of or strange, if nothing else, to jump into a stranger's car to get a ride downtown to a restaurant. Then all of a sudden, Uber and Lyft changed our association with this weird experience, and all of us began jumping into strangers' cars. Not too long ago, the thought of cutting the cord of your TV provider would have caused many people to break out in hives. Streaming abilities and platforms all of a sudden changed the game, and now it's hard to find many people that aren't streaming. And of course, in the workplace, not too far in our past, barely any meetings were ever being held virtually, and certainly a very low percentage of people worked remotely. Then a global pandemic changed the world, and we are still transitioning into new normals, for engaging with remote workers and communicating better virtually with colleagues and teammates and customers. If you've been following college athletics at all, the complete realignment of conferences, everything seems to be shifting in the world and change is all around us. And I'll be Captain Obvious and say to you that it isn't going anywhere. All of the talk about artificial intelligence has many people wondering what the next social norms that will shift will be. So all of this is not meant to scare us or worry us, but to acknowledge that a huge part of our role as leaders and within healthy team cultures is our ability or inability to navigate change and see a future that we want to help create. As listeners of this podcast, you might remember my episodes about the 6 A's of leading change, or, that framework that I talk about in my book, Thermostat Cultures. But the 6 A's of change and the process that we as individuals and teams and organizations go through in order to lead the change we want. So, on today's podcast, we're talking about the top 3 lessons we can learn as leaders and teams from the fall of the once tech giant BlackBerry and their plummet to irrelevance. What do we as leaders and cultures need to remember as we aim to navigate change? But before we dive into today's topic, let's pause, take a quick break, and we'll be right back. Hey everyone, I want to take a quick minute just to remind you about one of my favorite days of the year that is coming up on Friday, November 3rd, 2023, for Thermostat Cultures Live. This is a powerful day of development that I host and an opportunity for us all to step back, take a deep breath, and calibrate our thermostats for the road ahead in our own leadership roles, our lives, and certainly with the cultures that we are creating. This year, it's a hybrid event, and there are limited seats available for the in-person VIP experience in Columbus, Ohio. That's right, it's a really cool in-person VIP experience in Columbus, Ohio, as well as there are online virtual seats available for those who want to engage from a remote location. As always, I'll be joined by amazing thought leaders from around the globe, and it will be a day you won't want to miss. So visit thermostatcultureslive.com, thermostatcultureslive.com to learn more and to reserve your seat or seats for your entire team. So today we're talking about the lessons we can learn from the once tech giant BlackBerry and their experience of plummeting from, the plummet that they had from dominating the smartphone industry to becoming totally irrelevant. If you are a person of a certain age, which no judgment on anybody that is, we've got listeners of many different ages on this podcast, I know. But if you are a person of a certain age, and I happen to be one of them, then you remember when BlackBerry handheld devices were everywhere. BlackBerrys were everywhere. BlackBerry, the device that enabled you to send and receive email messages from the palm of your hand, were everywhere, especially across the business community. It was the hottest thing in the business world. And in 2009, in 2009, BlackBerry accounted for nearly 50% of the smartphone market. Let me say that again. In 2009, BlackBerry accounted for nearly 50% of the smartphone market. They were dominating. Absolutely dominating. They were ahead by miles. Yet, and that was 2009. Yet by 2014, only 5 years later, their market share had plummeted to less than 1%. Yes, you heard that correctly. Less than 1%. So they had nearly 50% of the market and were dominating. And then in a 5-year period, that shrunk to less than 1% in just that 5 years. So what happened? And more importantly, what are the lessons we as leaders and cultures need to remember as we navigate the change ahead of us in the world today? What can we learn from that example? And what can we learn to carry forward for the changes that we might face and to be ready for? What can we learn of how we might think and approach whatever it is that you have going on within your team, within your business, within your industry, for the changes that you might be experiencing or see on the horizon? What can we learn from that BlackBerry experience? And so here are the top 3 lessons learned that I'll share. Top 3 lessons learned from BlackBerry's plummet. 1, we must see beyond where we are to see where it's going. So these are top 3 lessons for us as individual humans, for leaders, and certainly for teams and organizations. But lesson 1 that we learned from the BlackBerry Plummet is we must see beyond where we are in order to see where it's going. Where are the trends? So Mike Lazaridis, I think I'm saying the last name correctly, who was BlackBerry's founder, had the brilliant idea of a handheld device for sending and receiving emails. There's no doubting that. It was brilliant. And it dominated the smartphone market for a brief period. And so the idea of a handheld device for sending and receiving emails was a brilliant idea. He saw the way the business community was on the go and was currently leveraging the need to send and receive messages on the move. His technology was hitting a need that existed right then and there. However, he famously rejected any ideas about moving beyond sending and receiving emails to helping the customer or the person with the BlackBerry connect to the internet, or to utilize these things called apps that were being created or that were on the horizon, that they could see the trend of these things called apps that were coming. He continued to tell his teams that all people want is to be able to send and receive emails. He thought that's all that the consumer was going to want. He couldn't see beyond the present reality and vision into what people were going to want into the future. He was committed to staying exactly as things were and holding on tightly to their market share. And so the first lesson that we can learn is, whatever we're dealing with, we must see beyond just where we are to see where it's going or what the trends are. The second lesson that we can learn from BlackBerry's Plummet is we must have the ability to rethink our ideas and stimulate progress. We must have the ability to rethink our ideas and stimulate progress. Again, famously, the BlackBerry's leadership rejected the notion that their product needed any adjustments or capabilities in the future. After all, they thought to themselves, they were already the best. However, at the same time, a little old company called Apple was imagining a world where people wanted to have their computer in their hands to move beyond just sending and receiving emails. And they thought people were going to want their computer like in the palm of their hands so that they can access web browsers and connect to newly created applications to help them do everything they wanted just from the palm of their hand. Their focus was on what people were going to want in the future, not just what they were currently experiencing. They were stimulating progress rather than just clinging to the past successes. It reminds me of that famous story about Henry Ford when he was asked during the years of developing the automobile that, the story goes that Henry Ford was asked, this is while they're developing the first automobile, and somebody asked him, who did he ask to know that people wanted a car or wanted an automobile? And his response was, if I had asked people what they wanted, they would have told me they wanted a bigger horse. His point was they had to envision something beyond the current reality that would meet the future needs that people, whether they knew it or not, they had never seen it yet, but were going to need it. Others weren't willing to rethink their original idea and were stuck only seeing where they are. So that second lesson from the BlackBerry Plummet is we must have the ability to rethink our ideas and stimulate progress to say, what are those trends? Where is it going? And what might our product or service need? How might we need to adapt in order to meet those changing needs? And the third lesson that I'll share as it relates to the BlackBerry story is number 3, we must surround ourselves with people who help us stimulate progress. We must surround ourselves with people who help us stimulate progress. The more I read about the BlackBerry story, the more I see that Mike Lazaridis had a few people around him that were willing to try to help him see the future that was coming, but many were quiet and not willing to challenge the status quo. It seems like he wasn't willing to listen, and most of the people on his leadership team remained silent and focused on their past success rather than the looming future that was coming. Now, I don't know all that to be true. I wasn't with them or don't know, but from the stories and the things you read about them, it seems to be, that's at least how other places have chronicled this, that there were very few people that were willing to challenge that, and or he wasn't really willing to listen. So as leaders and cultures, we have the opportunity to surround ourselves with people who will help us stimulate progress and encourage us to challenge the status quo. The moment we begin to think we have it all figured out is typically the beginning of the slide downward. So I use this story about BlackBerry as a cautionary tale, a reminder that we have the opportunity to, one, pick our heads up and see where things are heading beyond just where we are. Two, rethink our ideas and ask questions about what progress will look like next. And third, surround ourselves with people who want to challenge the status quo and help us continue to build upon our ideas and move things forward. As I talk about in culture shaping all the time, is that what we allow lingers and what we teach triggers. And so all of us, we all fall into patterns and habits and modes of operations where we allow things to linger that aren't exactly connected to the future that we want to create. And yet at the same time, we have the opportunity to identify those things, those behaviors, those policies, those operations, and then say, well, what do we need to teach differently? What does progress look like in the future, and how are we going to stimulate that? And every time we do that, we trigger a new idea and a new positive reaction to that. So, some questions for you to ponder today for your own leadership, your own life, or for the team that you're working with. What on your team needs your eyes and vision for where things are heading rather than just where they currently are? What on your team needs your eyes and vision for where things are heading rather than just where they currently are? Do you and your team have the ability to rethink your ideas and stimulate progress? And where are those opportunities to rethink and stimulate progress? And do you have people around you that challenge the status quo and have an ongoing conversation about how we nudge things forward? I hope today's conversation and podcast got you thinking in some new ways. I hope it got you thinking about maybe the change that you're experiencing and the lessons that we can learn to move us forward. If any of these topics are interesting to you, or if you deeper dive into anything that we're talking about the podcast is helpful to you, reach out to us, info@jasonvbarger.com, and we'll continue to design content that hopefully meets you where you are. I hope you'll go back and listen to past episodes and certainly share them with the people around you. And cheers to everybody out there for the path ahead. And remember that the future of leadership is you, is me, is us. And we need to get clear. We have an opportunity to really get clear on the temperature that we hope to set, and then be courageous and committed to breathing oxygen into the mindsets and actions that will sustain our path forward. Step back, remember, be a thermostat, breathe good oxygen. Thank you for listening to today's podcast, and I hope the messages and questions stimulate positive change along your path. As always, if these messages resonate with you and add value to your life, I hope you'll help amplify them throughout the world. Please rate, comment, and share on whatever podcast or social media platform you're using, and share this podcast with the people in your life or work who should be part of these conversations. That way, this spirit does, in fact, spread. If these messages or developing leaders and culture would be helpful to you and your organization, please contact us at jasonvbarger.com, jasonvbarger.com. And remember, we are all ambassadors for the culture we want to create in our life and work. We have to own the vision we want to be a part of. The future of leadership is you, is me, is us. Be a thermostat.